All right, everybody. I'm Colin McTamanay of P2W Fantasy Football on the P2W YouTube channel, and I am back with another interview with an analyst from an NFL team that I am picking their brain, trying to get as much insight as possible from the team so that I can relate it then to fantasy football for the upcoming season. You can check out other interviews on the P2W channel, Packers, Colts, Saints. But today we are talking Bears, and I am so graciously joined by Zack Pearson. Zack, why don't we just start introducing yourself, letting people know who you are, where they can find your work, and maybe how long you've been covering the Bears?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love doing this type of stuff. I've been covering the Bears at, 2015, 2016. It's about 7 to 8, 9 years now. I kind of lose track. It's what a lot of losing seasons do to you. You
They
kind
all
of
blend
just
together, I guess, huh?
exactly. Yeah, you remember the standout ones more than
Right.
anything else. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter. It's just at Zack, ZACK_Pearson. I write for the bearreport.com as part of 24/7 Sports. Just covering the Bears is one of my gigs, and I love doing it. And I'm excited because I think, coming off a tough season last year, I think the future is pretty bright here in Chicago.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree. And why don't we just hop right into it? Because I think the biggest talking point with the 2023 Bears was the start of the offseason. I remember sitting on my couch, I got the alert, the trade, all caps, with the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, the Bears were fortunate enough to land the first overall pick. A little bittersweet, obviously. That doesn't mean they had a great 2022 season, but hey, they land the top pick and they control the draft. And with that pick, they traded down to pick 9 with the Carolina Panthers. And in return, they obviously got pick 9, a 2023 second, which was the 61st pick overall, a 2024 first, and a 2025 second, and wide receiver DJ Moore. Any what if scenarios here with this trade? Obviously, Carolina was the one to finally able to seal the deal, but were there any other teams that you're aware of that could have, maybe in a multiverse out there, made this trade and altered the NFL as we know it?
Yeah, I mean, at the NFL Combine, just like talking to people during this time and kind of picking their brains, it felt like there was a good amount of teams that were trying to move up for number one, or at least inquiring, which is, what they should do. Almost every team should do, in my opinion. Someone like Indianapolis. I think Tennessee was kind of mentioned there. Houston was a name that, had interest, but never really materialized much. I think a lot of people pointed to Houston and Indianapolis as the two that were going to kind of be in a bidding war for it. But in the end, someone told me back at the Combine, like Carolina is a team to kind of keep an eye out on, and Las Vegas is maybe teams that would kind of shock everyone. In the end, it was Carolina. I think the deal breaker was getting DJ Moore. Ryan Poles pushed to get a player back in the trade from multiple teams, and I think the report was like DJ Moore and Brian Burns were the two names that he wanted from Carolina, and ended up getting DJ Moore, which helps the Bears offense. Looking in this offseason, it was like, the Bears needed a playmaker on offense, or they needed a playmaker on defense. So it kind of made sense to hear those two names. But it kind of felt like as time went on, Carolina was going to be the team because they really needed a quarterback. Las Vegas, they need a quarterback, especially what we know now with Jimmy Garoppolo. But they really weren't pushing hard for that. And then Houston, we saw what they did, so obviously they were in the mix. But I think the other, the team, if it was to, quote unquote, change the direction or dynamic of the NFL, would have been Houston moving up. And we saw they actually came back and moved up. But pretty much as it got down to it, it was all Carolina. All the smoke was around Carolina.
Yeah, I think hindsight's 2020, as you said. Obviously, Houston didn't have to move much. They were able to sit at 2 and still get a great quarterback in CJ Stroud. But it did feel like Carolina, looking back at it, having to move up from 9 to 1 makes a lot of sense. They jumped a lot of other teams that you just mentioned that were in the mix. The other rumor that was talked about before this trade went down, and I never bought into it, so I'm curious to pick your brain on it, was the idea of trading Justin Fields and the Bears taking a quarterback at number 1. Was that anything you ever felt was possible?
No. The Bears did say, like, we're going to do our due diligence scouting these quarterbacks, and they should. Like, I got some backlash on Twitter. I'm sure that people did too about, saying that the Bears should fully go to everyone's pro days. They should vet these quarterbacks, all 4 of them that were considered the top 4. That's their job. That's the front office's job. They committed to Justin Fields in the offseason. So like the trade stuff leading into April and March was just kind of just analysts making talking points. Once they committed to Justin Fields, they were committed. They were not going to trade him or move on from him and try to draft another quarterback. It just didn't really make sense. They believe in him. They got the extra first-round pick going in next year. So the smoke is, if Justin Fields doesn't play well, the smoke is going to be there again in terms of moving on from him. But this offseason, no, I never felt like there was a point where I could confidently say, yeah, the Bears are seriously thinking about moving on from Justin Fields and trading him. It never came about. I mean, the Bears did talk to these quarterback prospects, and they feel comfortable with Justin Fields, and they felt comfortable moving back to acquire what they did.
Yeah, and given what it took to get Justin Fields in the first place, I mean, it's not a lot of people started comparing it to, the Kyler Murray, Josh Rosen situation that happened in Arizona a couple years ago. I never felt the same way. So obviously now Justin Fields is the guy. Let's run over a couple stats real quick about Justin Fields, what we can be encouraged about, not only for 2023, but for fantasy football as well. 1,143 rushing yards last year, 7th amongst all players, every position. Absolutely electric. Some really, really big runs last season that everyone loved to watch. 160 rush attempts, second only to Jalen Hurts amongst quarterbacks. One of 6 quarterbacks to average 20 or more points in fantasy football per game. And 10.82 of those 20.5 points per game were from his rushing stats. That is the second highest ever, only to Lamar Jackson's 10.84 during his 2019 MVP season. Obviously, Lamar, a little bit more passing in 2019, which is why he won the MVP award. He had 28 points per game in fantasy football. So obviously, the elephant in the room here is we need to see more from Justin Fields passing. The Bears were dead last year in the league, 22.2 pass attempts per game. What do you expect from Justin Fields in 2023? Maybe not 160 rush attempts, but I still like to think that he's going to run over 100 times. But getting DJ Moore, obviously a full off season with, and we'll talk about him in a second, but Chase Claypool. What do you expect from Justin Fields in this next year of progression?
Yeah, I think, you said it, the big thing is the passing. He's going to get his rushing attempts. He'll be over 100 rushing attempts. That's just part of his game. He's not going to be where he was last year. I'd be shocked if he is. That means the offensive line's totally breaking down. The wide receivers aren't very good.
Right.
Or Justin Fields.
Or they're scoring a lot of points, right? They're just
they're scoring a lot of points. Justin Fields is not reading the field well as a passer. So it could kind of go a bunch of different ways. I think, the rushing numbers will be there for fantasy. I think he'll get his rushing touchdowns. So he'll get a couple 100-yard rushing games. He's got to improve in passing. They got him DJ Moore. They're going to hopefully get a healthy Darnell Mooney here back for training camp. Hopefully get a healthy Chase Claypool back for training camp. He's going to have weapons at tight end with Cole Kmet and Robert Tonyan. He's got a stable of backs in his backfield. He's just got to progress as a passer. If he does, that means great things for the Bears. It means great things for fantasy owners if you have him. And big monster numbers. I'm not like projecting he's going to be the first 4,000 passing yard quarterback for the Bears just yet. I think a number that I'd be comfortable with, over 3,000 passing yards, right around that, like kind of 3,000 mark, 20 plus touchdowns. He'll have some interceptions. I think he's going to take a step forward in his game. And I think it's just the weapons helping him. I would look at that passing. He's just got to become a better passer. Not only fantasy-wise, but for the Bears to believe in him long-term. And from what I've seen so far, it's been up and down at OTAs and minicamp. That's kind of to be expected. He does look like he's kind of trying to get the ball out quicker, reading the field a little quicker, but I think training camp will tell us a lot more on where he's at in his status here in late July.
Yeah, I would have to think you agreeing with me. He's still going to run over 100 times is music to fantasy football managers' ears. 5 quarterbacks did so in 2022, and they all finished inside the top 10 amongst the position in fantasy football. Fields obviously did it. He finished as the 5th overall quarterback on a points per game basis. 4 of those quarterbacks, in fact, finished inside the top 6. So he runs 100 times again. He can be, or he will be, a top 10 quarterback. We'd like to think. But
and he missed 2 games too, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, when you consider what he did, him and Jalen Hurts, I mean, especially they both ran 160 times and both missed games.
Yeah.
Just ridiculous. Something we've really never seen before, other than I guess Lamar. Um, you mentioned the 4,000 passing yard total. 1995, Eric Kramer, single season passing yard record for the Bears, 3,838 yards. No one has broken it since 1995. I mean, think of everything that has happened since then. If Justin Fields were to reach that number in 2023, it would be 225.82 yards per game if he plays all 17. He averaged just 149.46 yards per game in 2022. So you're saying maybe he doesn't reach that 4,000 yard mark, sets that record. You think maybe he falls somewhere in the middle between 149 and 225 yards per game?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this the other day. If you were to set his, prop on passing yards per game in the betting market, I think we'd probably set it at 165, 175. I think that's fair too. Like you said,
Yeah.
140 yards a game. That's not modern day football. And watching the Bears last year, you could see why. There was like no pass protection.
They're just
The
running.
wide receiver, yeah, they're running. Wide receivers struggled, but that's their scheme too. Like they really want to run the football, and we saw it this offseason. They got rid of David Montgomery, kept Khalil Herbert. They signed Donta Foreman. They signed Travis Homer. They drafted Roschon Johnson. They're going to put an emphasis on the run game. So with the passing, I mean, yeah, like if he could get to 165, 175, I think it'd be an improvement. It's hard for me to say he'd be at 200 over per game going into this season. Now, he'll probably have a game or a couple games where he gets over 200, maybe 250. He's probably going to have a couple games where he's at 120, 130. So it's kind of just going to be a mixed bag. And it's also going to be, what the Bears dictate in the game plan. Like the coaches aren't thinking fancy. They're not thinking betting, unfortunately. They're thinking, okay, we get up, on a team, we're up 10, 14 points. We can settle on our run game. Mm-hmm. There's also be times where they're going to have to pass, and we've seen him pass. I mean, New England game, he passed a lot. The Pittsburgh game a couple years ago, I thought was his best passing performance. There's also games where they've had to run a lot too. So it's just going to be like a mixed bag with this Bears offense.
Yeah, I think the key here is just trying to find a little bit more balance with Justin Fields. Yeah. Still keep that rushing upside, but you got to improve as a passer. Yeah. But I think the fact still remains, still going to be an elite fantasy option, and can get him after the Mahomes, Allen's, Hurts tier. So definitely someone to still invest in 2023. Obviously, you just mentioned emphasizing the run. So let's talk about some of these running backs. They obviously let David Montgomery walk in free agency. He has been their leading rusher for the past 4 years. 242 attempts 4 years ago to 247, down to 225 in 2021, and just 201 rush attempts last year. But still, lead back. 800 rushing yards in all 4 seasons, but just one over 1,000 yards. Now they're bringing in Donta Foreman, 27-year-old. Not a ton of rushing attempts. Last year was his best season. Torn Achilles as a rookie a couple years back. Khalil Herbert, the only guy that's still in this backfield. And then they're bringing in Roschon Johnson, who most people know out of the University of Texas. He was Bijan Robinson's backup, per se, in college. How do you see this backfield splitting up? Obviously, Justin Fields is still going to get his in the run game. Is there a clear front runner here that you think he's going to hand the ball off to the most, or do you think it's more of a committee approach?
Yeah, it's tough because I ultimately think it's going to be a committee approach, but Khalil Herbert will be the quote-unquote starter going into training camp. Here's the other thing. I also think Roschon Johnson will be the quote-unquote starter eventually, maybe by week 7, 8, maybe 6. But there's going to be a role for everyone. Like if Roschon takes over the majority of the carries among the running backs, you will still see significant carries for Khalil Herbert. You'll see like more significant carries for Donta Foreman. This is a tough backfield to project. The one thing I'd keep an eye on for fantasy owners, and it pretty much has nothing to do with fantasy stats, is pass protection. It's something the Bears have harped on all offseason. The running back coach, the head coach, Matt Eberflus, they want their running backs, their lead backs to be really good in pass protection. That's where Khalil Herbert struggles. I think that's something where if Donta Foreman wants more playing time and Roschon Johnson can take advantage of more playing time, I think it would be the pass protection. Now, that has nothing to do with rushing yards, receptions, or rushing touchdowns, but it's a good metric to use. And if you're trying to break down who's going to get the most snaps out of these backs. So yeah, it wouldn't shock me if Khalil Herbert was the number one back in week 1, but let's say him and Donta Foreman split carries while Roschon Johnson maybe got 3 to 4 to start. Obviously, Justin Fields probably going to get the majority of the carries or majority of the rushing yards in that offense. It's just it's a weird backfield to project. And then you have the third down back situation. Like, I don't think they're going to keep both Travis Homer and Treston Ebner. I think they'll pick one of the two. But will they be the third down back? Will Roschon Johnson be the third down back? Who'll be the short yardage back? Who'll be the goal line back? There's a lot of questions, man, with this rushing attack. But I feel safe saying right now that Khalil Herbert will be running back 1 going into training camp. And I also predict that Roschon Johnson will probably be their breakout back this year and someone, that could kind of make fantasy owners like happy in the waiver wire, when you're coming down that stretch week 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, it's weird, man. This backfield is it's so many questions with it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that happens a lot when you have a quarterback who runs as often as Justin Fields does.
Yeah.
We can look at the Ravens. You can look at the Eagles. Those are two other backfields that I think people are trying to figure out who is going to emerge here. And it might just not be anyone. It might just be a lot of, shared plates around the field. I actually did. I partook in a piece for P2W Fantasy where we talked about guys you could get in rookie drafts this year. And I was just pounding the table for Roschon Johnson as one of my guys. This was prior to him getting drafted by the Bears. I thought he was one of the most complete backs in this draft, overshadowed by Bijan Robinson and his excellence, obviously. But you mentioned the pass protection. You cannot score fantasy football points if you're not on the field. I don't know how else I could say it. If he's going to be out there doing pass protection, obviously that is a huge asset to the Bears. And Roschon Johnson can catch the ball. So this is a guy I'd like to see maybe get some receiving upside, especially when the receivers are still a little lackluster, even with DJ Moore out there. But still, 62 targets to running backs last year, second lowest only to the Eagles, 61. Again, when you have a quarterback that runs, there's less opportunities for checkdowns. Is that something you might see Justin Fields get a little bit more comfortable this year? Maybe a little bit more targets to running backs with a better passing attack overall?
I think that's one of the things that you want to see Justin Fields work on is taking what the defense gives you. Like you don't have to take off and run if the play, if your 1 and 2 options are being taken out. Like you can dump it off to a running back. Like you said, they didn't do that much last year at all. You can dump it off to a tight end if you need to. You can even dump it off to the third wide receiver, your third option. I think that's something he's gotten better at. I've noticed it a little more in OTAs and minicamp. So it wouldn't shock me at all if they do, if you do see, Fields taking that a little more, maybe picking up, a couple chunk yards here on first or second down rather than trying to force it. And obviously that benefits the running backs. It benefits, tight ends as well.
Yeah, I think my approach to the running backs as of right now, we're recording this on June 28th. Obviously, we have an entire training camp to get through, but fantasy drafts, as fantasy drafts go, Roschon Johnson is the cheapest of the 3 running backs we've talked about. I'd wait to get him, or as Zach said, maybe he ends up on the waiver wire. Get him a little bit earlier than, maybe that week 6, 7 expectation of him maybe taking over that backfield. Let's look at these wide receivers because, as I just mentioned, they are a little bit lackluster, but there is some upside to be had here. Obviously, DJ Moore is a guy that we don't need to talk about much. We know what he's capable of. He is, I think we can both agree, going to be Justin Fields' top target in the passing game. Darnell Mooney, though, hopefully back for training camp. 2021 stat line, 81 catches, 1,055 yards, 4 touchdowns. He followed it up last year with just 40 catches for 493 yards and 2 touchdowns in 12 games. He obviously got hurt, but that was still the most yardage of all wide receivers on the team. So, we've been talking about it's in a theme here. Lackluster passing game. Hopefully it all improves. Who can we talk about behind those two guys, though? Because the reports right now about Chase Claypool are generally negative. It doesn't seem that there's a positive attitude about his work ethic. Is that something that you've noticed when you've, followed this team, or can Chase Claypool turn it around and really make something of himself in Chicago?
Yeah, it was tough last year for him. He was traded midseason right before the
Yeah.
deadline. Never really got going in this offense. And then the game he kind of did get going, he got hurt in against Green Bay. He had like the little outburst with Justin Fields and I want to say like the Atlanta game or Detroit game. Yeah, he just struggled. And I think a full offseason will help him. Problem is he hasn't been healthy since, OTA started. I think he was there for the first week of OTAs. They got hurt, missed the next 2 weeks, missed all of mini camp. He would be the guy, I would say, behind those two. That kind of be a nice fancy option. He could project a slot in as wide receiver 2 on the depth chart, depending on what they want to do with him and Mooney. And I think he's a guy you can play on the outside. He's a guy you can play in the slot. He offers some versatility there. They kind of have 3 guys like that. You can use Mooney, Moore, and Claypool in those combinations. It's just, you have to see it from Claypool. Like, I think the reports out there are fair in a way where maybe we saw some stuff we didn't like last year. Same time, like, I'm willing to give him a fair shake on things. I think, the full offseason would help him dearly. He's got to get healthy, though. In terms of, like, wide receiver options, he would be my gut number 1 choice behind Moore and Mooney. However, man, I mean, I really like what they're going to have in the rookie Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati. I think it's a deep threat, as a deep rookie. If you're looking in a rookie draft or even as a waiver wire claim, I think he might be able to make some noise late in the season as well. But it's just, other than that, it's just like, it's a very, they have a lot of guys behind Moore and Mooney, but there's not a strength to have a wide receiver depth. Like, Velus Jones is probably not going to be making impact plays. Tyler Scott's probably going to take a little time to get, used to the NFL level. Dante Pettis will get some targets, but he's not a consistent guy week to week. So, yeah, it's really top heavy. It's DJ Moore, it's Darnell Mooney, and then it's probably Chase Claypool.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite strategies from a fantasy perspective right now is you can get Justin Fields and DJ Moore pretty much back-to-back in like 4th, 5th, 5th, 6th rounds in drafts and stacking those guys, because the connection between them is going to be just it's going to be constant. It feels like. And maybe just discussing these wide receivers has my gears turning a little bit more that Justin Fields is still going to run a lot again, and hopefully they can utilize Roschon Johnson or one of the running backs in the passing game a little bit more consistently. But Tyler Scott, good name there to remember for dynasty fantasy managers out there. Maybe not the most popular name, but a guy that has a clear shot to some upside given where he's at and the roster he's on. Let's wrap up here with some tight ends. Obviously, Cole Kmet had a great season last year. Led everyone in receptions with 50, yards and 554, and touchdowns with 7. Still only finished as tight end 19 on a points per game basis. Really hot and cold. Obviously had some really big games, and then some other just very typical NFL tight end games where he just wasn't a receiver, and he did a lot more on the field than catch the football. But now they bring in Robert Tonyan, obviously former divisional rival from the Green Bay Packers. Are these two just going to get in each other's way, or do you think Cole Kmet can still remain the top receiving tight end?
I think Kmet will still be the top receiving tight end. I think Tonyan's going to be a nice compliment to him. The thing with Cole Kmet, like you said last year, he showed signs of breaking out. He finally showed signs of being, what they thought they were getting when they drafted him in the 2nd round. Obviously, a different regime. But then he'd kind of disappear a little bit for a couple games. And I think that's probably going to be the formula this year as well. You'll see that a lot. He'll have some big games, have those touchdowns. But they're adding in Robert Tonyan, who's primarily, a receiving tight end. So he's going to get a couple target shares there. I wouldn't be shocked if they use a lot of 2 tight end formations, maybe tried to create some mismatches with the 2. But it all goes back to the passing attack with Justin Fields has to get better. And if it does, you could probably see an uptick in Cole Kmet. You could see an uptick in Robert Tonyan. But if I were to bet, I would say I'd probably say Kmet would be the tight end to target. I wouldn't go too high on him. But then again, tight ends in fantasy are typically very top heavy with the 4 to 5 guys. And then I know from my experience, I struggle to find tight ends if I don't take one early. So, yeah, I would be comfortable with Cole Kmet as a top 10 tight end this year. But again, what's that production going to look like? I mean, I'm not looking at him as a 100, reception guy, even as an 80 reception guy. I think what we saw last year would probably be, similar to what we'll see this year. Maybe give or take a couple more receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns. But I would think he'd probably be in that same range.
Yeah, I'd like to see what Cole Kmet can do in the red zone, because I do think if DJ Moore is going to be busy getting them down there, maybe Cole Kmet figures to be a top option for Justin Fields to just chuck it up to and hope he comes down with the ball in the end zone.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, I don't think any of these tight ends are guys you want to be targeting in your drafts per se, but if they fall in your lap and you want to stash them on your roster, use them as a streamer from week to week, I think that's the best approach. So that's really it for as far as covering the Bears. I do think we got, the meat and potatoes here. We covered most of, the guys that we think are going to produce in the 2023 fantasy football season. Just to recap, Justin Fields remains an elite option at quarterback, running back by committee, but hopefully someone emerges. And then DJ Moore, he's just going to get fed targets. I think he's going to be a huge asset, maybe even finishes as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy for the first time in his career. He's always had the receptions, always had the yardage, never really put the touchdowns together. So that would be pretty cool if he gets that going in Chicago. Zach, thank you again so much for joining us. Is there anything you want people to know before we let you go?
No, not really. I mean, you can just follow my work on bearreport.com. And on Twitter, it's just at Zack, ZACK_Pearson. And the Twitter for the website is just Bear Report. We have a lot of coverage in training camp, daily stuff. I'll be there every day. Hopefully I can help you guys out. And hopefully the Bears are pretty good this year and they make some fantasy owners pretty happy.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some exciting games from the Bears this year. I think a lot of people are going to be watching how Justin Fields improves. No pressure, Justin, but we're rooting for you. And so that's it. Have fun at training camp. I know it's a grind, but I appreciate you taking the time out here at the end of June before that all gets going. Everybody, thank you for tuning in to the P2W YouTube channel. I'll be sharing this on my Twitter as well, at Colin_MCT. Zach, if you don't mind sharing it, that would be great.
For sure.
And everybody else, take it easy, and we'll catch you for the next one.